Hi everyone. Yes, so thank you for the introduction. As Shane said, I'm going to be talking about black carbon over the Amazon during a project we did in September 2012 called SAMBBA, which stands for the South American Biomass Burning Analysis. It's a particularly good acronym, I think you'll all agree. So we were flying on a fairly large research aircraft around Brazil. This image up here, this is from the biomass burning season that has just been. It's a picture from the International Space Station. You can see the large number of fires. This is in Mato Grosso state, but also that smoke is being advected into the neighbouring state. It can travel quite far, large distances. The image in the bottom right is fire hotspots from MODIS for the period that we were in there in SAMBBA. So there's a lot of fires, as you can see. So just to provide the sort of historical context, this is what the Amazon looked like in 1984. And if we sort of go on to 2012, you can see there's been quite a large change. There's been a huge amount of deforestation just over the course of 30 years or so. We were based in Portobello, which is the capital of Rondônia. Rondônia is really the sort of the poster child for deforestation worldwide, really. Since the 1970s, there's been a large amount of deforestation, which has really changed the face of that region. If I sort of flick back and forth, there's quite a striking sort of change in terms of the land use in that area. So the goals of SAMBBA really were to focus on regional and global climate, biosphere carbon cycle interactions, both of which you'll hear about in a little bit in the next two talks, numerical weather prediction, and also air quality. So increasingly a lot of people in Brazil actually live in the sort of arc of deforestation, so that's potentially some large health consequences, and also this smoke can be advected towards the more populated regions. This is the aerosol optical depth fields just for the two previous years to 2012 when we were there over the biomass burning season, which runs from August to September. And you really see that kind of increases into September. You have a large amount of aerosol across the whole region, really. 2010 was a drought year. That was quite an extreme year for aerosol. 2012 is sort of, in terms of the last sort of 5 or so, 6 years, it's a fairly sort of typical year, I guess. It's the sort of average year in terms of the amount of aerosol. Just to put some perspective on this from a sort of climate perspective, so biomass burning, this is just taken from the IPCC report. It's the aerosol radiation interaction and radiative forcing for the different components. Biomass burning is a somewhat curious one. We don't actually know whether it's warming or cooling at the sort of global level, which is not a great place to be, really, in that sort of sense. The radiative forcing on a global level is relatively small, but we know that the biomass burning tends to be very strongly contained to certain geographical locations where it can have a very large effect. So it's important to constrain that. And I'm going to focus on the black carbon. Again, that's very uncertain, and a lot of that is to do with the components that it is mixed with as well, as we've heard a little bit about earlier. From a South American point of view, in Tammy Bond's sort of mega opus on black carbon, one of the statements she made was that absorption by atmospheric aerosols was underestimated by models over South America. So that's something, obviously, hopefully we can try and have a look at these suspects with our SAMBBA data. And also, there have been several studies in the Amazon that have looked at absorption of biomass burning smoke and how it can inhibit cloud formation or even induce cloud burn-off. So we're on this research aircraft. It's on the bottom here. The main thing I'm going to be talking about is the single particle photometer, which has been talked about already. So that measures refractory black carbon on a single particle basis. So we get number, mass, size, and mixing state on this basis. So we were flying, this is Brazil, South America, and it's the normalized difference vegetation index on it. The dark green areas, the rainforest. The lighter areas to the east are the sort of Cerrado region, which is a savanna-like environment. These are the flight tracks from the aircraft. So we covered quite a large extent of the sort of main areas of biomass burning and also extended into the Cerrado environment where there's a lot of agricultural fires. Separated out into sort of some different regions. So in the north we have around Manaus. You've probably heard a lot about Manaus this week. Then there's this sort of main sort of area where we flew quite a lot, which was around Rondônia. We also did some flying in Mato Grosso, which is just over here. That's where the majority, the most burning occurs in the sort of present day. And we were in this eastern region as well. And then this little box here, this is our sort of pristine area. There's not much wasn't much burning around there. It was also at the end of the project where there was more precipitation. So it should be a relatively clean environment. So that's just to sum up what those are. So the pristine is more of a sort of unperturbed rainforest, and then a lot of the others have a lot of fire activity around them. And Manaus is more of an urban area, but also there are some fires around there. So this is the vertical profiles of the black carbon, so altitude versus black carbon on the x-axis for the different regions. So the central black line is the median concentration, and then these are the 75th and 25th percentiles. The red dotted line is the campaign average. So what we can see is we have most of our black carbon material is concentrated in the lower sort of 4 kilometers of the atmosphere. Over 90%, up to practically 100% of the black carbon is in that bottom portion of the atmosphere. We do not see much in terms of black carbon mass aloft. It very much gets contained in this bottom sort of 4 kilometers, particularly, these sorts of regions are very clean aloft. What we do see is that there is more black carbon in the east, where there are more flaming fires, these agricultural fires, than in the deforestation regions in the rainforests, where we have more smouldering fires, which have preferentially less black carbon material. What we do see also is in this sort of pristine region, it's not really pristine. It's you've still got 0.5 microgram per meter cubed of black carbon, which is a reasonable amount of black carbon, and that's in a sort of pristine environment. This smoke really does get around and covers a large area. This is to sort of look at some of the thermodynamics and how that controls that sort of vertical profile. So this is looking at potential temperature here. This is the wet equivalent potential temperature, so taking into account water and total water content. So we see over this bottom 4 kilometers of the atmosphere, the potential temperature increases whilst the wet equivalent potential temperature decreases, which means we're conditionally unstable. So as you might imagine over the rainforest, that's why it's called the rainforest. You have a lot of convection. Over that bottom 4 kilometers, we're really ripe for convection, so you get a lot of vertical transport. It's more stable aloft, and they actually get more in sync aloft, so you've got more stable air aloft. And that air aloft is typically quite dry, as one might expect. So this is looking at the wet equivalent potential temperature versus the total water content, and this is a water vapor wet equivalent potential temperature mixing line, which is a mouthful. But essentially this means that when we have this warmer and moister air, in this sort of portion, this is from surface air which has been mixed up. If we sort of move down this line, we're in more cooler and drier air, which has been mixed from higher up in the atmosphere. And this sort of mixing line holds over the sort of bottom 4 kilometers. So this is just to orientate you for the next slide, which has all of these regions again. And there's the data points from straight and level runs from the aircraft. And they're colored by the black carbon mass concentration. So I've sort of chosen the colors so they saturate a little. So the very blue colors are about 1 microgram per cubic meter, whereas the red ones are for like 100 nanograms per cubic meter, so relatively clean conditions. And we very much see these sort of warmer and moister air masses have a lot more black carbon. The source is at the surface, it's being mixed up. The dry air masses tend to be aloft, and we see very little black carbon in those. There's very few instances where we see sort of dry air that has a lot of black carbon, and even then, those are still in that bottom 4 kilometers. This is to look at this is looking at the coating thickness as a function of altitude from the SP2. What we essentially see is there's not a huge amount of variability in the lowest part of the atmosphere, and it's also fairly consistent across the sort of the biomass burning environments in the west, so in Mato Grosso and the 2 Rondonia phases here. Oh, sorry, I should have said the Rondonia phases are separated by how much precipitation there was, so this was drier and this was wetter. The coatings are somewhat smaller in the flaming fires, and that seems to be, and we don't see much change downwind either, so it's very much set that there's a lot of coating material at the source of the fire, and that doesn't change much on a sort of regional aging basis. We do see more variability aloft in the coating thickness. That's likely to do with wet scavenging of material, so as the black carbon particles get up to that altitude, some of them have been through cloud and they've lost their coating. Some of them might not have been through cloud and have retained their coating. So there's more variation aloft, but there's fairly limited variation on a sort of regional basis in the lowest part of the atmosphere. Just slightly switching gears and looking at sort of bigger picture, and can remote sensing try and pick up some of these sort of geographic changes we're seeing? So this is from MISA. The top is aerosol optical depth, the middle one is absorption AOD, and the bottom is single scattering albedo. If I sort of just look at the data from our sort of operating area in the biomass burning region and just pick out a sort of longitudinal points, the AOD is relatively flat across the region. There's a little bit of a slope. The absorption component does go up as we head east, and that does pick up and that then obviously shows up in the single scattering albedo. It does tend to more absorbing material in the east. So that's qualitatively consistent with our measurements. Like, so we see more black carbon in the east. There's about 10% of the submicron mass is black carbon in the east versus about 5% in the west. It's also consistent with the single scattering albedo measurements with the nephelometer and the PSAP. That data wasn't quite finished, so I didn't put it up. But there's a slight bias in terms of, it seems like in the east, particularly the single scattering albedo from the in situ data is quite a bit lower than what is coming up from MISA, but there could be many reasons for that, and the PSAP is a filter-based absorption measurement, which might not be the best in this sort of environment. But the sort of implications for this are really, there has been, over the past sort of decade or 15 years or so, there has been an expansion of burning in the Cerrado environment. So the sort of rainforest fires have decreased. There's been less deforestation in those regions, but there's been an expansion of these agricultural fires in the Cerrado. So in the future, will that mean that we will have more black carbon in that region? Also, the flaming fires have a lot more CO2 as well, so it could be interesting in terms of those changes. Just to finish, black carbon containing aerosol is prevalent over the whole of the Amazon basin, really, and it's typically contained within this lowest 4 kilometers of the atmosphere. So if we look at the numbers, do back-of-the-envelope calculations, we're very much in a cooling effect during cloud-free conditions. This is a fairly typical image of South America in the morning, so it's fairly clear skies. I mean, there's some large frontal activity in there as well. But if we then look in the afternoon, you get a lot of this build-up of shallow cumulus, and that can also develop into not so shallow cumulus. But cloud bases are around 1 to 2 kilometers. The cloud tops are around 4 to 6 kilometers. So we have a lot of black carbon in that kind of region of the atmosphere. So you could have a lot of black carbon either overlaying clouds or sort of intermingling with clouds and having impacts therein. So that'll be something that we want to look a bit more at in the future. So yeah, just to finish, it gets everywhere and it's potentially very important. So thank you.